Okay. First of all, can you hear me? Okay, nice. I want to remind you that next time is going to be our last meeting, our last lecture, and we will be having the last lecture by me, but also I would like to dedicate some time if you all try to be there in presence in Piacenza at the usual hour to discuss about eventual doubts, problems, comments, um, or doubts about the exam, doubts about how will be the evaluation, or also about the topics of the course, the bibliography, what is mandatory, what is not. Of course, in the slide you will find everything, all the information, but you may have something to ask, something that isn't clear, something that is worthy to be discussed together. In this case, of course, I will be available to dedicate a few of the time of our lecture to these topics. I can't stay for any longer than the hour of the lecture, unfortunately, because I have a meeting in Milan in the afternoon. But of course, we have 4 hours, so we have plenty of time to discuss about anything you may need. That's about the organization, and I think that's all, unless you have some doubts to or something to ask now, because of course I'm aware that it's the end of the course and you may have some doubt, and I see that other people are coming in the meanwhile and joining us. So that's let's say try to focus a little bit this week on what you would be eventually willing to know before the exam, or things that are not clear, because it's the last opportunity for us to meet each other in presence before the exam. Of course, you can write me emails, but it's better to discuss everything in presence if we have this opportunity. So no questions, no doubts, everything clear. Okay, we can begin. So with the lecture of today, I thought that I would like to dedicate. Is it recording? Yes. Okay, so I can maybe put the presentation in full screen. Okay, the lecture of today is going to be dedicated to these three figures that some of them have already appeared more or less here and there in our course. Barragan and Scarpa, for instance, if I remember well, Scarpa, yeah, for sure, in the lecture about the ground that we did last time, and Cisa, I guess that you all know, this Portuguese architect who is still alive and who is one of the most important, famous, talented living architects in Europe. We are dedicating to these three figures through a thematic focus that is architecture as landscape. It is a very generic title, you may say, but the focus would be the way in which these projects that we are going to tackle today are in a way in a midway, in the mid between architecture and landscape. In some of these cases, we will deal with architectural projects, but they are architectural projects that are dealing very much with landscape issues and that are behaving in a way as if they were landscapes. So we may try to widen our idea of landscape, as we tried sometimes during our course, not only to the design of the open spaces and of open spaces with natural and artificial, dealing with natural and artificial materials, but also with architecture itself, with interior landscapes that are that are aware of natural elements and natural materials as much as landscape projects in their own sake, so open spaces projects. So these three figures are actually figures that have different formations. Barragan has a formation in engineering, not in architecture. He acts as an architect and as an architect of gardens. So in a way, he's not a landscaper in the strictest sense of the word, but he acts a lot as a designer of gardens in his native Mexico, in different cities, the native city of Guadalajara and then Mexico City, for instance, especially. Scarpa also has a formation that is a little bit strange because he actually doesn't have an academic formation, but then is also integrated into the Venice UAV Faculty of Architecture for some time as a professor. Cisa is an architect. He's an architect who is formed in his native Portugal in a very interesting period of the Portuguese history, in which there is a political movement and an opening toward what is happening in the rest of Europe. So there is this twofold movement between the look toward the Portuguese vernacular tradition and the opening toward modernism and avant-gardes, European avant-gardes, Brazilian modernism as well, etc. So Cisa is formed during this very interesting period of Portuguese history in the city of Porto, under the supervision, we can say, of another important figure of Portuguese architect, that is Fernando Távora. So we will not maybe so much focus on the formation of these three figures, but I would like to, let's say, make you understand how the three of them aren't actually can't eventually be considered landscape architects in the strictest sense of the word, such as could be one of, I don't know, Burle Marx, for instance, or Olmsted, if we go back in the history that we try to trace during this course. But they are figures that cross the boundaries between architecture and landscape. And I'm arguing in this lecture that they have a very deep sense of landscape, of what is of landscape, a landscape vision, also when they are dealing with projects of architectural projects. So we will deal with different kind of projects, gardens and etc. I guess that some of you, maybe Camilo, has got some problems with the line, but I hope he's going to fix it. Okay, so let's go to see the first case study. We will move today through case studies, single case studies of projects that are, in my opinion, making very much explicit this attitude between architecture and landscape, and the disciplinary merging of these two fields. In the case of Barragan, of course, we could have been choosing a lot of his projects, because from the end of the 30s, beginning of the 40s. He leaves his native Guadalajara, and he already left his native Guadalajara to go to Mexico, to move to Mexico City. Mexico City begins to work for Burgess clients, for Burgess clients that are very much aware of last modernist European projects, and many Mexican architects are already introducing the new modernist language into the national, we can say, milieu, architectural culture. So he starts to build houses for modernist houses for more or less rich clients. At a certain point, he's kind of disappointed with this profession, the profession of the architect who is working for different clients and who is trying to meet the needs and the needs of the clients, the requests of the clients, and he start to focus a little bit more on some garden. Like he purchased some land, some pieces of land. Some of them are for himself, some of them are for some other clients. And he focuses a little bit more on this idea of the garden, on this theme on this program of the garden, as something that in a way allows him to investigate and to explore much more his attitude towards calm, isolation, meditative spaces, something that allows Barragan to explore his side of, let's say, the facets of his personality, which brings him to isolation from contemporary metropolitan chaos, from mass consumption culture. He's a Catholic, so he's a very spiritual man, and his search in the field of landscape and of the garden is very much focused on the spiritual research that he carries out, not only as an architect, but also as a very sensible man and very convinced Catholic. I want to focus now to this huge endeavor that begins to occupy him more or less since the 40s in Mexico City. That is the big development, urban development of the so-called Jardines del Pedregal. Because this is, of course, a case study in which we can really detect his attitude toward what is for him dealing with a very strong and violent landscape, very connotated landscape. That is the one of the area in which this development will be settled. So let's go to see a little bit the story of the area and the story of the approach of Barragan to this area. I guess that some of you know the project, at least you heard about it. Maybe you saw some images, maybe you heard about it because of its celebrity. We have also to say in this premise that Barragan won the Pritzker Prize in 1980, and as soon as he won the Pritzker Prize, it wasn't so much known outside Mexico, and it was it was a very successful architect, but it was not the myth that he is today. So the myth of Barragan has been built in the last decades, like from the 80s, since nowadays, more or less in the last we can say 50 years before he gained the Pritzker Prize, and especially after he gained the Pritzker Prize, also through some photographs. So there is a very strict connection between the photographs of Armando Salas Portugal and the construction of the Barragan's myth. Then, of course, Barragan was taken as an example by Frampton and many others as an example in the 90s and the beginning of the from the 80s onwards, let's say, as an example of how modernist itself could be renewing itself and producing many different local languages. We talked a little bit, we introduced this topic a little bit when we talked last time about Piccionis. Of course, Barragan was one of these figures which was pointed out in a certain moment in order to go out, let's say, to free modernist architecture from a certain too much canonical, let's say, line, and to explore much more the local versions and local interpretation of modern architecture that had this capacity, like for example Lucio Costa in Brazil also had, or Niemeyer in his special way, to merge a little bit a national character, a traditional aura with the modernist orthodoxy in a way, not orthodoxy, but language, syntax. So let's go to see the area. The area is an important premise for this project, and as it happens in all landscape projects, it is the very beginning of the story. So we have to understand how the area, the importance, the symbolic significance, the deep symbolic significance of this area for the people of Mexico City and for Mexicans in general. About 7 million square meters created by a powerful eruption of the volcano Xitle 2,000 years ago, an immense sprawl, and it was thought that it was still more ancient. At the beginning, the belief was that the eruption of the Xitle was dated to 2500 before Christ. Then it was realized, scientists realized that it happened more or less in 100, 200 before Christ. So an immense sprawl of rock with 3 separate layers of basaltic rock and volcano and lavic rock, the result of 3 different eruptions. So the area of the Jardines del Pedregal, of the Pedregal, because before Barragan, the area was only called Pedregal, that is meaning is describing its volcanic stone composition of the soil, no? Pedregal, the pedreira, come no, something made of stone, only of stone, which was characterized by rough and polished surface, countless shades of basalt, from gray to deepest black, reflecting the green of the vegetation, the infinite patterns that can be glimpsed in the shapes of the rocks. This is Pedregal de San Angel, a vast area southwest of Mexico City, a little bit out of the urban agglomeration at this epoch. Nowadays, of course, it is completely integrated into the urban conglomerate, considered as untouchable as it was inhospitable. Before 1940, no one had ever tried to tame it, and when they first approached it, they found it still rather magical, rich in indigenous rare plant and animal species. So this is an image of how the Pedregal appeared to the eye of its explorers, we can say, more or less in the epoch in which Barragan started his huge endeavor of taming this completely wild and untouched landscape. So you can see this formation of lavic stone, of basaltic formations that creates a sort of the image of a fluid landscape, of something fluid, the lavic movement that has been stopped in the moment of the eruption. So there is this very strong feeling of the violence of the lavic eruption that is still visible in the way the rock has been consolidated in its actual configuration. Here you see the photo is very interesting because you can see the extension of the area, you can see the integration, this dialogue between you can imagine the colors, of course, the dialogue between this very black stone, basaltic stone, of the geological layer, and the green of the native vegetation that is eventually basically made of cactaceae, but not only, but anyway of very many species, agave and bushes of native vegetation. With this man, which is standing on one side of this monumental rocky formation. Of course, this powerful landscape has been for a long time. For example, this painting is a painting dating to the 20s. At the center of the exploration and attention of several Mexican artists. Mexico is living, as you maybe know, a very rich artistic season during the 20s and the 30s in the search of a national artistic character that creates a very homogeneous culture with the peaks of great talent and high quality in artistic production. Of course, the great muralists such as Diego Rivera and Siqueiros, etc., are active in this period. They are very deeply connected to political leftist movements, and they are very well integrated into the artistic côté milieu of the country. Orozco is one of these artists active in this period, and he's one of the mainly of the three figures who are exploring the Pedregal more than others, and that are creating in a way the premises leading to the taking of the Pedregal by Barragan during the 40s. So they are creating this aesthetic appreciation of the Pedregal, which is completely filled with symbolic contents, with symbolic elements and significance and meanings. Here we can see a very interesting comparison. We can see this integration of this Mexican women, peasants, or anyway, they are of course representative of a low low income class, low income social status, low social class, and they are carved in a way, they seem to be carved in the very same matter of the rocks of the Pedregal. So these volcanic formations are actually linked also to some of the myths of foundation of the Mexican civilization that were based on the activity of the volcano. I'm not going into the legends and the foundative myths of Mexican culture because they are very complicated, and I'm not an expert, so I'm afraid to say something not so true. But it is worthy to say that the myths of the many myths of formation of Mexican people are always strongly linked to the activity of the volcanoes. So it is interesting how Orozco, in order to explain to express Mexican people, the very essence and nature of Mexican people, is representing these women as they were carved in the very same matter of the volcanic rock from which that is in a way the roots from which the people, the Mexican people, has spread. And this is one of the many possible reading. Diego Rivera also explored the Pedregal a little bit later. This is a painting of 1944, so we are more or less in the epoch in which Barragan begins to move his attention towards this area. You can see a different representation that is more focused on the wilderness and the power of this landscape, in which the black of the stones is represented as a very dark blue made of different nuances of blue, and there is an attempt to detect some of the very local native species of the vegetation. Here we see what in Italian we call fico d'India, which is a typical species coming from Mexico and then going to colonize the south of Italy in the course of the history, or other cactaceae, etc., and the mountains on the backdrop. So there is this idea of a landscape that is the reign of nature without the presence of man to disturb the richness, the plentiness, the perfect harmony and violence and primigenic violence of this landscape. Another important figure of this tree, that are Orozco, Diego Rivera, and the last one is Dr. Atl. Dr. Atl is actually called is Gerardo Murillo Cornado, but is more known in the Mexican history and artistic milieu as Dr. Atl. It's a word, a name, art name that stems from a ancient Mexican word. Anyway, he was a painter, but also a passionate in geology, and he was also at a certain point of his life, he decided to go living at the basis of a volcano and left the city in order to make to have a life, to spend his life at contact in a direct contact with nature. Dr. Atl represents this landscape of the Pedregal also in its harshness. This is, of course, an engraving in which this, say, black and white color valorizes at its most the the harshness of this landscape. Here we eventually don't see traces of vegetation, maybe some sparse grass here and there, but the landscape is something that appears to be, if it was not for this street, for this path carved within the rocks, it seemed to be very primeval, very archaic, a very archaic landscape, conveying a sense of what the world should have appeared, maybe in the epoch of its creation, or evoking feelings like that. Here we have a photo. I don't know exactly which is the year in which the photo was taken, but I can imagine more or less in the 40s, in which Barragan, on the left, of course, is photographed in one of his many and frequent excursions to the area of the Pedregal, together in the company of Dr. Atl, Gerardo Murillo Cornado. So he was also a friend of Orozco, and we may say that these two figures are the ones who influence more his vision and his fascination toward the area of the Pedregal. But at the same time, we have to say that the very idea of creating a new neighborhood, urban development in the area of the Pedregal comes from Diego Rivera. This is an article that you see in the slide, an article which is published several times. Of course, this is not the first time in which it is published, because we see the article together with a photo of the entrance gate of the Jardines del Pedregal. So after the completion of a portion, at least a portion of this new development. But the text is a text that Barragan knows very well, since from some letters, some scholars argue still before of his very publishing. In this text, it's a very small article. Diego Rivera actually claims for the potential use of the Pedregal to create a civil neighborhood, a beautiful neighborhood dedicated to the middle class, or the different social classes, in order to in a way use it as a reservoir for a new land for development, in a situation in which Mexico City was really growing at a very fast speed out of its existing limits, and with the speed that was uncontrollable by planning instruments. So you have to imagine, I guess you all know how it worked. You have to imagine a growing of the population and the growing of the housing, also of the informal housing in the metropolis of Mexico, in these huge megalopolis, which were growing and growing at a very fast speed, that was looking for solutions, urban solutions, very urgent urban solution to give to provide with new areas of development, free areas of development, and new houses, this growing population. So Diego Rivera, you, of course, if you understand Spanish, you would maybe like to read this very short text, in which it doesn't give very specific solutions or rules or directions for the development of the neighborhood, but it says that it would be interesting to consider this area as a new area of development, also in order to create a neighborhood that was in harmony with this incredibly rich and powerful natural landscape. So of course the neighborhood, the development, the architecture of this development would have been harmonized in a way. There should have been found solutions, measures in order to harmonize this new development with the natural setting. And which could be these measures? According to Diego Rivera, these measures would be based, of course, in the indice di fabbricazione, so in the how to say, rates of construction, the construction rates on the surface, related to the surface on the first stance. On the second stance, he also, of course, he said that it should be avoid very carefully the use of eclectic historical styles of the houses that were very fashionable still in those years in Mexico City, for example. I don't know, maybe many burghers and rich men, upper class people would like to have represented their houses in historical historical styles, eclectic styles, chalet or whatever, new Renaissance, Gothic, neocolonial, and whatever. So his claim was to avoid the use of historical styles and to avoid the use of tilted roof. So it said the landscape will ask for the use of a plain roof, of a plain roof, of plain roofs, and the use of both traditional and modern materials, such as glass, such as ferro, ma è ferro? Non mi viene. Iron, or of course concrete. So following in a way this suggestion, the Diego Rivera didn't orient or directly directed to Barragan, but it was a general claim for the harmonic exploitation of this area. Barragan decided to take this endeavor on his own shoulders, we can say, and he began to purchase, together with his associate Alberto Bustamante, Luis and Jose Alberto Bustamante, to purchase at a very low cost, because the area was considered inhospitable and inhabitable, to purchase a very big area, a very big portion of the Pedregal, in order to start to build its own ideal urban development, based actually on the idea of the garden, of a garden that was to be that needed to respond with architecture, with the very simple and careful gestures to the to the land, to the area, to the connotations of this landscape. So between 1945 and 1950, Barragan built the Jardines del Pedregal de San Ángel residential park, turning the inhospitable volcanic landscape into a unique urbanization. Associated with Luis and José Alberto Bustamante, he acquired at a low price 6 million square meters area of volcanic stone in Pedregal, with the intention of building an elegant residential area that combines the requirement of modernity with the expression of a strong national identity. These are not words by Barragan, these are words by other contemporaries that commented the operation. Barragan faced a leap of scale if we compare it, of course, to his previous realization until that moment, where private houses and gardens mainly, where he had to grapple between the public space of the street and the intimate space of the house and the garden. So he took on himself the master plan of the whole development. Barragan devoted 7 long years to this enterprise, during which he designed the project but also saw to its publication, surrounding himself with a group of architects who cooperated on its construction and involving artists like Diego Rivera and Matthias Gerritz. So we see here a photo of Barragan in his studio, in his atelier, with this gigantic reproduction on his backdrop of the master plan of the Pedregal that we can see. So this part, let's say, is the part that Barragan acquired, the new development. You can see the way in which he tried to harmonize, to adapt the master plan of the new development to the geological formations existing there, working on an organic layout which make the most out of the topography and which worked really together with the topography instead than applying towards on the area top down a pattern, a certain model of urbanization, a certain pattern of urbanization. The idea was to create a sort of park, a neighborhood that was also a natural park in which the houses, the residences, of course conceived for an upper middle class, were meant to be completely harmonized and completely valorizing the landscape and being valorized by the landscape at the same time. So of course architecture should have had some specific requirements and should have been approved by Barragan himself. So not all the houses of the neighborhood would have been built by Barragan. He actually, after all these long years, only built 4 houses in the neighborhood. But he was supposed to control and to supervise all the realization that other architects would have been asked by clients to do to realize in the area. This photo is interesting because it makes you understand the way in which Barragan is very evocative of this way in which Barragan actually conceived this neighborhood to be his own artistic creation, if you know what I mean. Let's say, of course, it is very hard to associate a whole urban neighborhood to a single man, and in fact, this was this suddenly, not immediately, but after a while, went completely out of his control, because the financial interest that began to insist on the area, on this successful beginning, because the beginning was very successful and a lot of people began to want to purchase areas and to build their houses in the area. So this created a situation in which the building market began to be very pushing on this very area, and this process gradually excluded Barragan from the initial control on his own creature. But in this photo, we can still see this idea of a single man who is pursuing his idealistic endeavor of creating an ideal neighborhood that would have been concretizing his idea of what the city could be in terms of responding to the needs of being in direct contact with nature, or isolation and meditation, etc., that for him were very important and crucial for creating a better society than the one he knew, and to in a way put a sort of corrective, we can say, obstacle corrective to the spread of mass consumption society that also invested a lot building markets. So the quality of the urban environment in the Mexico City, he got to know as soon as he moved in this big city from Guadalajara. So here we see, of course, this is the Pedregal is also this. So the Pedregal is all the area that we see here, not only the one with the white tissue or this white paper on it, because this is, say, a gradual, say, it's of course it's a very big development, so it is made of different steps. Anyway, here we see a photo from the top of this development in the very beginning, in which the street grid has been planned, has been realized with the according to Barragan's will, to Barragan master plan, in which you can see how there is this very ambiguous nature of the operation that is between an act, a very, very violent act of colonization of this still untouched area at the margins of the city, and a respectful way of urbanizing this land. So it's an operation that is actually very ambiguous in its nature. So Barragan wants to this natural landscape to be valorized, to be valued, to be kept, to be conserved, to be conserved, kept as it was. But at the same time, he was the author of a huge operation of colonization of this area. So of course, anytime you have to, let's say, balance the urbanization with the valorization of nature itself, you are in a position of ambiguity, and you have to urbanization actually is an act of taming of violence on nature inevitably. So the plan designed by Barragan had a topographic layout with roads, plazas, walls, and gardens that followed the shapes of the land, ponds, and lakes, to which he gave names and hierarchies, also establishing rules and standards. But the main idea behind the whole project was the of the garden, both artificial and natural, merging into an immense Eden, an idea that dominates all the work of the Mexican master, according to whom the garden is the place of intimacy and meditation, but also element of continuity with the context. So the great challenge of the Pedregal is to widen this idea of the garden as the place of intimacy and meditation and of continuity with the context, not only to the very dimension of the private garden, of the hortus conclusus, no? of the secluded private garden, that is something that affirms its extraneity to the city, but on the contrary, to integrate this idea of the garden within the city itself, to create an ideal portion of the city out of an intimate garden in which urbanization is able to convey this sense of intimacy and meditation that the garden is able to convey. So here you see the photos that show Barragan in his first, let's say, taking of possession of the place, a place that is still behind him, completely untouched by urbanization, and in which he projects his dreams of a renewed idea of the city, utopian in a way, idea of the city at the crossroad between nature and urbanization, in which these two realms could merge in a harmonic way that allow for a way of living that was completely the opposite of what the contemporary metropolis would be able to offer until that moment. And of course, it's also interesting the way in which he actually intervenes into this landscape. If we go a little bit into more in detail, more if we go into the small scale of the interventions, say going beyond for one moment the urban, the master plan scale of the whole intervention, we can detect a very specific attitude that Barragan uses towards this landscape. That is a very interesting attitude still for us nowadays. That is an attitude of completing natural formations with artificial materials, but without mimicking the language of nature or even the materials, the natural materials. So we have a very clear distinction here between this esplanade of concrete and the existing lavic stones. But this actually is very come si dice, efficace, very efficient, very effective in valorizing the shapes of the rocks and creating the feeling, the sensation that the rocks are emerging with all their natural, geological, primitive violence from this polite and horizontal slab of concrete, which doesn't have actually, if you see, definite boundaries, because the boundaries are the boundaries of this plaza are defined by the very shape of the rocks. There is the power of the morphology of the rocks that is driving, leading all the gestures, the architectural gestures, landscape gestures that Barragan is undertaking in this area. And then a few, a very small staircase that is carved between two pieces of volcanic stones is the only element, artificial element, which is connecting in a way the different levels between these artificial elements. So we have the plaza, we have these small stairs. Here we have behind, we don't see it so well, a path, and we have a sort of continuity of the paths and of the possible experience of this place without interfering much with the morphology of the stones, but actually trying to make the most out of this morphology. Of course, there is also the use of local stones. For example, in this house on behind this plaza, as Diego Rivera had suggested in his small text, in the Pedregal, Barragan uses both natural or traditional, more than natural, traditional and modern materials, but in a way in which the landscape is never mimicked. There is never, let's say, this Anglo-Saxon, for example, tendency in landscape to mimic the landscape itself and to try to create an artificial landscape that seems to be natural or that evokes the eventual natural shapes, natural forms. But there is always a very strong contrast between the human intervention and nature, but in a way that allows to make nature emerge with all its power. Here we see several photos from Barragan archives and historical photos of the interventions in the Pedregal, in which you can see a little bit this attitude that can be detected in several points and several special passages. Of course, the intense points in which the design is more present and more intense are the places of passage between one level and another level. So the staircases, for example, in here, you can see the presence sometimes of some concrete walls in order to create come si dice, to limit, to create boundaries and to limit the spaces and to create more intimate spaces that are both part of the houses, both part of the public spaces of the neighborhood. Here you see photos that are mostly representing the natural landscape. Here you see this use of horizontal walls of stone, of lavic stone, which are in a way giving an order, no? Measuring this otherwise immeasurable area, and that are parts of the master plan of Barragan. Here you see again this attitude in which slabs of concrete are filling in a way the voids between the rocky formations in order almost to read a hidden geometry already present in the nature. So one of the principles that is in my opinion, linking very much this project to what Sisa will do in the piscine, in the swimming pools in Lessa da Palmera that we will see afterwards, is this attitude of filling the voids of left by nature and make visible a sort of geometry that in a way seems to be always existing in the place, but seems to be hidden before the intervention of the architect, make it readable to everybody. So this is a quotation from a conference that Luis Barragan is pronouncing in 1951 in California about the Pedregal. Barragan wasn't used to have public conferences and public speeches, if not for very important reasons. And this gives you a lot of information about the importance of the project of Pedregal and the promotion of the project of the Pedregal for him. The fact that he accepted to pronounce this conference and to promote, let's say, to spread, let's say, to explain the project of the Pedregal to a wider public. He says, I always prefer uneven and oddly shaped soils, because in such a case the success of the garden is assured. Blessed be the geological accidents. And of course, this tells you a lot about the Pedregal and the attitude that we saw in the previous photographs. Barragan doesn't want to create from scratch with architecture variation and capricious articulations of nature and of its irregularities, but on the contrary, he prefers, he'd rather work with geological accidents and with natural irregularities, because it is from nature that the landscaper, the architect, the garden maker should start in order to create this varied environment, and not from architecture. Architecture should make the minimal gesture in order to valorize what nature already has in itself, already possesses in itself, in its morphology, in its topography, in its specific condition, configuration, conformation, etc. And he also make reference in this conference to an important figure that is being referenced for him since his first travels to Europe during his formative years, that is Ferdinand Bach. I don't know if you ever heard about Ferdinand Bach. I'm sure you haven't, because he's not a very a famous figure, especially nowadays. But he was a cultivated Frenchman who, in the first decades of the 20th century, in the 20s, etc., he built some Mediterranean garden in the coast of France, more or less in the limit, geographic limit between Italy and France. For example, is Garden of Les Colombiers, that is considered to be his masterpiece, is in Mentone. Mentone is exactly near the frontier between Italy and France, on the side of France, on the coast, overlooking the Mediterranean. And he is in this period is also writing several texts, theoretical texts, on this idea, this idyllic idea of a Mediterranean garden, which would be considered as a sort of retirement from the come si potrebbe dire, from the degradation of the values of values in contemporary society. So there is a very strong ethical basis in his Mediterranean idyllic scenery that he praised in his writings and in his few realizations in France. And Barragan was actually very much inspired by the writings of Ferdinand Bach. He also visited his gardens in his 2 years when he spent 2 years in Europe during his formative years, in the same period in which he got to know the works by Le Corbusier and by many others. But it was it's interesting to specify how the lesson of Ferdinand Bach was for him very influential in shaping his idea of the garden as something that should be expressing isolation, meditation, serenity, detachment from mundane preoccupations, detachment from the chaotic everyday life of present society, and all these things. So there is a very strong influence that Ferdinand Bach had on Barragan since its youth and throughout his work as an architect. Of course, as an engineer and as an architect. He was formed as an engineer. And to conclude, he says, in fact, I remind you of the thought of a great writer and landscape artist, Ferdinand Bach, who said that a garden carries within it the whole universe. It represents the price of our work, and in the art of making gardens we find all the serenity of which a man is capable. Of course, this trip to Europe is important to drive his interest from the studies in engineering toward architecture and the art of gardens. This meeting with Ferdinand Bach is very important in this sense, of course. So I show you other photos of the Pedregal, of the public spaces of the Pedregal, in which, as you see, architecture, stone, very simple horizontal walls and staircases, dialogue in a strict relationship with the rocks and with the vegetation present in the place. So of course Barragan wouldn't have eradicated the vegetation, but would be praising for the conservation of each single tree that he found on the place, on the site. That is also very important. And Diego Rivera in his text also praised for the potential of the Pedregal as a sort of reservoir of the cactaceae species of Mexican origin that could be a sort of museum, open-air museum of native species for him. Okay, other photos that shows you always this kind of attitude, as I said, connections and difference of level. The solution of the levels is the most intense, are always the most intense points in which his capacity as an architect and as a landscaper also are used. And then I show you some of the most, let's say, topic portions of the Pedregal. One of these is, of course, the so-called Plaza de las Fuentes, which is one of the main entrances to the new development. Barragan designs by himself this gate, this entrance gate, monumental entrance gate, and this plaza, this paved plaza, from which concrete surface a few volcanic formations are emerging, evoking images of surrealism, for example, of metaphysical painting, the Kirikian painting in a way, and all this surrealistic evocation and this metaphysical character of the place is still more echoed and still more reinforced by the presence of this so-called Animal del Pedregal, that is a monumental sculpture conceived by the Mexican artist Matias Geritz, a sculptor Matias Geritz, at the very entrance, before the very entrance of the Pedregal, in front of the gate designed by Barragan. So there is the idea also of collaborating with some of the most interesting artists, architects of these years, active in Mexico. And of course, one of these is Matias Geritz. Matias Geritz will be collaborating with Barragan also in several other projects. Maybe you can remember the towers, the colored towers that he and Matias Geritz realized at the entrance of I don't remember the place. I'm sorry. Barragan and Goeri. I think maybe you know that you have seen the project. I didn't put the slide in here, but the Torres de Satellite, we are in Mexico City as well, and we are in a sort of great highway circulation node in Mexico City. Maybe I cannot. No, you can find it on Google. It's very easy. Torres Satellite. This project is a later project realized by Barragan together with Matias Geritz. You will find it also in the essay I suggested to read when we dealt with Burle Marx and with Noguchi, and today it is part of the bibliography as well. The Garden as Art, taken from Peter Walker and Melanie Simo's book on American landscapes. So of course the photos by Armando Salas Portugal are also contributing quite a lot to this surreal metaphysical character of the Pedregal, and so it also contributed to the myth of the Pedregal outside of Mexico, in conveying this idea of this landscape that is made of few elements and which is enriched, which is populated by this very strong contrast of light that are, of course, making the most out of the strong light of Mexico City. And this can be said for many of Barragan's projects, also the later ones, in which the use of very strong colors are valorized by the presence of this incredible contrast between portions of light, portions in light, and portions in shadow in the photos by Armando Salas Portugal. Okay, so you see also here, the things we said in the previous photographs, this contrast of light are completely part of the construction of the image of this place, that you can see here in a more secular, let's say, representation of the epoch of its construction. You see how the rocks emerges from this paved surface that is the main plaza, that is considered the monumental, in a way, entrance of the neighborhood. And then small areas of more idyllic nature, in which, for example, this water, this pool of water is also here carved into through the introduction of small walls, through the presence, the lavic landscape. So contrast very much with this lavic landscape that you can see behind. So there is this gay display with the shapes created and left by the rocks. So remember these images, because when we will talk about Caesar at the end of this lecture, you will understand the many places of the many resemblances of these projects. This is another view of it. This makes you understand the way in which, of course, the Jardines de Pedregal was also meant to be a successful development for a upper middle class, affluent middle class, we can say, who searched for a way of life, a different way of life. Okay, so it interpreted in a way, in a very, with a very incredibly delicate attitude towards the natural landscape, this need of this search by an affluent society, Mexican society, to find an area for more for a better way of life, not solving, of course, all the problems that Diego Rivera was mentioning in his text about the need to create an area which would be able to provide a house for different stratas of the population. Anyway, here we have that explains you this intention. You have, for example, some of the propaganda, say some of the promotional, more than propaganda, promotional materials, promotional communication materials of the development. At the beginning, Barragan himself was in charge of supervising not only the constructions by other architects, but also the communication strategies on the neighborhood. But also this process went out of his hands at a certain point, and a lot of very trivial, we can say, communication promotion materials have been produced during the following years. For example, these ones, okay, is praising this exactly this image of an affluent society with the private pool immersed in the vegetation, in which the Jardines del Pedregal are represented as the lugar ideal para vivir, the ideal place to live in, etc. And here we have instead one of the a book, let's say, a sort of how can we say, how can we call it, sort of flyer in which the main realizations in the Pedregal are being showed, and this has been I guess, supervised by Barragan, and the quality of the materials are very high, and also of the presentation, of the graphic presentation. But it's also interesting the way in which they present the Pedregal. The Pedregal is presented to the public. It says, invierta usted en Jardines de Pedregal de San Ángel, que es la zona de mayor futuro en Mexico. Move in Jardines del Pedregal, that is the area of major future in Mexico. In our lands, both sold areas are being constructed, are being built, the more modern and more beautiful residences, housing units in Mexico. Of course, there is this action of promotion that is very important at the beginning to guarantee the success of the operation, also the financial success of the operation, and that would go out of hand a little bit later during the process. So more than 300 homes were built, designed by prestigious architects connected in different ways with the modernist movement, many of which have unfortunately been demolished nowadays or irreparably altered and therefore are quite irrecognizable nowadays. The first house, built in 1947, was designed by Max Cetto, for his family that led the way. Max Cetto is, as you may know, a German architect who actually had worked with in the Neue Frankfurt great urban operation in the period between the two world wars. As soon as Frankfurt became, as Berlin, in parallel as Berlin, a place for experimentation of new housing standards, new housing methods of construction, new technologies and new distributive models, and Ernst May was in charge of the construction of several new neighborhoods in let's say in a sort of crown around the city of Frankfurt, with very high standards of not only of living conditions and of construction of housing units, but also and prefabrication methods. There is the experimentation of the first prefabrication methods are especially in the Frankfurter experience, and also in terms of landscape design, because if you go to see the estates, the Siedlungen built in the Neue Frankfurt years, in the period between the two world wars in Frankfurt, they have always been focusing in a very special way on topography, on the open spaces between the buildings, on the providing of a good amount of public space and well organized in terms of landscape public space for the people living there. So it was a very interesting experience on many different ways, on many different levels. And Max Cetto had been working in this experience together with Ernst May. So Max Cetto is, and then he moved to Mexico. And as soon as he moved to Mexico, he was presented to Barragan, and he suddenly understood the potentiality and the interest of the operation of the Pedregal, and they collaborated together with Barragan also in a few houses in the neighborhood, in the development. Other architects are local architects, Mexican architects, such as Francisco Artigas, Ramirez Vázquez, Enrique Yáñez, Félix Candela, José María Buendía, Antonio Torcos. Some of them are not Mexican, but are active in Mexico. Like Félix Candela. Maybe you know that Félix Candela is a Spanish architect, naturalized Mexican. Anyway, I'm going to show you some photos of these houses. This is one of the most interesting houses built. This was built together. This was designed together by Barragan, together with Max Cetto, in Avenida de las Fuentes, inside the Jardines del Pedregal, more or less between the end of the 40s and the beginning of the 50s. This is a photo that shows you one that is maybe the crucial point of all of these houses, of the better example of the houses of the Pedregal, that is the relationship between the interior space and the exterior. Of course, the landscape is the point of departure also for these architectures. So the relationship between the interior of the house and the landscape around is at the center of the design effort in every of the houses that Barragan and other, in the best cases, built in the Pedregal. In this case, we have a very, let's say, orthodox modernist language with this big glazed facade that is guaranteeing a sort of continuity, a sort of literal continuity, we could say, between the interior, the living room in a house, and this external patio that brings into the house the characters, the characteristics, the features, the main features of the wild landscape beyond the house. So you can see a sort of it's a sort of miniature of the essence of the landscape of Pedregal, brought inside the patio of the house through the presence of this stone, sort of some spots of vegetation, of local vegetation, dialoguing as in the public space that we saw before, with the pavement and the modern materials and the artificial materials, very modern, very navigated, very polite, very not polite, polished. Sorry, not polite. And this continuity of in the spaces in the entrance, and you can see the same thing on the other way around, from the interior of the house towards the exterior. So you from the interior of the house, you really are in the condition, in the best condition possible to contemplate this landscape with the mediation of the patio, and then with the horizon, what you see in the horizon of the rest of the landscape that is continuing and that is developing outside the house. So the wilderness, in a way, of the landscape of Pedregal enters the house through this almost square glazed facade, which is mediating and creating this very strong exchange between the interior and the exterior, between modern language and the rough language of nature. This is another house, the Prieto Lopez house, also built by Barragan. You also see here, although the landscape around the house is a little bit different, is slightly different because it's more tamed in a way. There are more trees, there is a concentration of trees, there is a sort of mall, but there is always this idea in which the outside is in total continuity with the inside. And so in this way, I think that we may also consider this architecture to be a sort of landscape in itself, because it really works with the same features that in which the open spaces are working. If you look at these patios, they are completely you can't make a distinction between these patios and the spaces and the open spaces, the public spaces that I showed you before, like such as the Plaza de las Fuentes. They are working with the very same instruments, with the very same attitudes, and with the approach and the features are the same. And the nature is always integrated into the architecture, and the architecture is not mimicking the nature, but it's contrasting very much with it in order to make its roughness and its power still more evident. This photo, I'm sorry, is not so beautiful, but the photo is beautiful, but the resolution is very bad. Okay, then I show you very, very fastly some other example of, for example, in this case, we have houses of different other architects, such as Francisco Artigas. This is also interesting, the house of the Dr. Federico Gomez in 1952, working also with a very modern language and dialoguing with this garden, with this luxurious garden created around the house with native species, but of course in a different way than Barragan had done before. But here we are still in a very good example. This is an article that Max Certo published in German, Bauten in einer Lavalandschaft, Mexico. So explaining and conveying this incredibly qualitative experience of the Pedregal for European public, with the photos of Armando Salas Portugal and the presence of the sculptures of Matthias Gerritz and the houses, different houses built by different architects, etc. So this is the last house I show you. This is always Casa Prieto. And I show you just some photos, some more recent photos in order to show you in color and also the condition of the house more or less in a more recent epoch. You see here for example, the way in which the architectural dialogue with this garden. There is always this idea of having enclosed gardens for meditation that then have openings onto the landscape around. So this idea of having a sort of mediation between the private space and the urban space. And also the presence of water that is actually always present in this very arid landscape, and that is and it's always present in Barragán also as a symbol of feminine power. We will see it in Los Clubes, in many other projects, and this is a very, very typical feature used by Barragán in his gardens. Okay, so now I would like to make a break, a very brief break. It is okay, we can have maybe 10 minutes if it's okay for you, and see each other at noon in order to, maybe no, it's 52. Let's see in at 10 past 12 maximum, 5 past 12, let's say 5 past 12 in order to have the time for a coffee, and then we go on with Carlo Scarpa, if it's okay for you. Okay. If now until now we dealt with a project that worked with rocks as a dominant material, in this case we are looking into projects that are working with water as the dominant material. And we are doing this through the works of Carlo Scarpa. We are going through 3 projects by Carlo Scarpa. So we are back in Italy for some times, and not only Italy, but specifically Venice and the Veneto region, the surroundings of Venice, with the specific coloristic vocation of Venetian art and architecture that Scarpa interprets in a very magistral way. Although, as I said, he is not formed as an architect, so he doesn't have a degree in architecture. He only gains an honor degree in architecture when he's already a famous architect, but he won't make in time to receive it because he will die before with an accident. So he studied in the School of Arts, Accademia di Belle Arti, no? School of art school, and he always acted as an architect in a way out of the laws. Let's go to see why we are dealing with water. Of course, Venice means water. There is no Venice without water. Venice is built on the water. The first project that we are, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit like cold. The first project that we are dealing with is the Fondazione Querini Stampaglia. It's a project of renovation of an existing palace of the 16th century facing one of the campi in Venice, the public squares, typical Venice public squares, in which Carlo Scarpa is called at the end of the 40s by the director of the Foundation Querini Stampaglia, which is and Cultural Artistic Foundation, there is an incredibly beautiful collection of paintings of different epochs, with a focus, of course, on Venice production. That is, the director in those years is Mazzariol, Carlo Mazzariol, who is a friend of Carlo Scarpa. Is also a very important cultural figure in Venice in those years, and so he, together with the president of the foundation, decides to charge Carlo Scarpa of the renovation of some of the areas of this 16th century palace, and especially of the entrance, reorganizing the entrance. So one of the main themes is reorganizing the entrance to the palace first. Then is to reorganize some of the rooms in the ground floor of the palace in order to host cultural events such as exhibitions or conferences, etc., and to redesign the small garden behind the palace. So the first theme is to reorganize the entrance. The entrance was happening from another side, and what Scarpa is doing is to build this small bridge, very elegant shaped bridge, from which the new entering to the foundation is organized. Then the other another renovation project by before Mario Botta and then Valeriano Pastor is going to change again the circulation strategies, let's say, of the palace. Anyway, this is the first one of the first choices that Carlo Scarpa does. That is to enter from this side of the palace, to cross the channel, the canal, the small canal running along the side of the palace, through this very small bridge, resembling, but with very modern shapes, the traditional ones that are crossing the canals in order to get to give entrance to the palaces. So this is the first thing. Here we see it from the top, of course, and we see here already, say, of course, this theme of the water is already very present since from the entrance of the palace. But okay, this is the plan of the garden. I wanted to show you this before when I said that Carlo Scarpa was asked to intervene on this small garden that was in a very strict, bad condition, also because it was a very small garden that was, come si potrebbe dire, strict between the palace and the high wall separating the palace from the street. So the conditions were not very favorable, very full of advantages, and it should be carefully studied a way to valorize this very small rectangular piece of open space of garden that was not couldn't become wider, that couldn't be ampliato, that couldn't become bigger. Of course, the idea, and we will arrive to the garden later, was the idea of the hortus conclusus. Here, yes, the idea, the classical idea, traditional idea of the hortus conclusus, the enclosed garden, that is one of the original matrices of the garden in absolute, in the Roman culture and in the classical culture, and then in the Renaissance, etc. Anyway, before going to the garden, I would like to show you the intervention that Scarpa introduces into the ground floor of the palace, in the few areas and rooms in which he is called to intervene and to change and to renovate the existing architecture of the palace. And here the strategy is very, very interesting because in a way Scarpa decides not to close with the wall, with the architectural device, the high water typical of Venice from entering the palace. That was one of the main issues of the project, but on the contrary, he argues that the presence of the high water and the changing level of the water in the ground floor of the palace would have been one of the elements of the project itself. How? He dealt with the high water through, now I will show you, these are images in which you see areas of the ground floor of the palace filled with water, entering completely the ground floor in the moments in which the level of the water is higher in the outside, in the canals outside the building. And so you can see places that are eventually filled with water and actually conceived to be filled with water in special moments of their lives. So this is a piece of an excerpt of a letter that Carlo Scarpa. Sorry, before I said the wrong name of Mazzarioli. This is Giuseppe Mazzarioli. This is an excerpt of a letter which Carlo Scarpa writes to Giuseppe Mazzarioli while he is thinking to the project, while he is working at the project. He says, and it's very interesting to understand his intention, the underlying intention of the project. He says, inside high water, inside as in the whole city, it is only a question of containing it, govern it, using it as a luminous and reflective material. You will see the play of light on yellow and purple stucco on the ceilings. Wonderful. This very short sentence tells us a lot about Scarpa, his attitude, and this specific project. First of all, it tells us about the idea that the building itself is not separate by the city, from the city, but it's a part of it. That is very revolutionary if you think about it. 16th century buildings conceived to be closed and opening only through the main windows to the canal, toward the canal. Scarpa conceives it as a part of the city, something in which the high water, as in the whole city, can enter, and in which the high water, as in the city, should be contained, governed as any other material of the architectural project, using it as a luminous and reflective material. So it kind of makes explicit the idea that the water and accordingly the light and the plays, that the games that light produces thanks to the presence of the water inside the building are actually materials with which the architect can work exactly at the very same level as concrete, as stone, as bronze, as mattone, as brick. Okay, so exactly at the same level, water and light are here materials, main materials of the project. So architecture, also the inside of a building, according to Scarpa, is a landscape. There is nothing that distinguishes actually the way in which he acts in the rooms of the ground floor of the building and of the palace, and the way in which he acts on the outer a portion of the enclosed garden. He plays with the very same materials. And then we also see when he talks about the play of light on yellow and purple stucco on the ceilings, we will see something, we catch something about the sensorial attitude of Scarpa's architecture. That is one of the main features which characterizes Scarpa's approach in relation, if we compare it to the approach of several contemporary Italian architects that are who are working in the very same years as Scarpa. Scarpa has been always considered a sort of detached, isolated figure, not only because he didn't actually have a degree in architecture, as I told, but also because he was also an architect who didn't produce much theory. And that was a typical condition of Italian architects, to be cultivated architects, architects with beyond building and constructing, were also active in the theoretical arena, in the academic arena, in the debate, in the cultural debate. Okay, so Scarpa was more, say, linked to a certain Middle European tradition of artisanal work, a sort of artisanal approach toward architecture that makes him work in a more sensorial, experiential, phenomenological way, and less theoretically oriented way than other Italian architects of the same period. And this also interprets very well this coloristic, Venetian tradition, that is the coté, the environment, the artistic cultural environment in which Scarpa is active for all his life. Let's go to have a stance in these areas, in these rooms of the palace. Okay, of course, we can see the use of the materials, in which, for example, in this room, there is this pavement that reinterprets the typical tradition of the Venetian seminato, no? That is interpreted in a contemporary pattern, geometrical pattern, and the irregular pattern, asymmetrical pattern, that reacts with this stucco ceiling in red. Red is also a very typical Venetian color, the colors of Titian, no? Of course, Scarpa is very aware of the artistic, great tradition of Venetian painting. And here, this other room that is linked to this one is giving access at the end to this, to the garden. So, of course, here again, we have a continuous promenade, a continuous experiential path from through the different rooms, and the garden is actually conceived exactly as it were another room, exactly as the others, but open air, an open air room. Again, here the ceiling is in stucco and is reflecting the light in a way that dematerializes the concreteness of materials, the matter of the architecture, and dissolves in a way architecture in a reflection, in a game of reflection, in a mirror-like play of reflections of the garden on the ceiling, of the light that always changes and always dematerializes architecture in something always different, and always reacting to the environment, always reacting to the meteorological conditions, of course. So this idea of bringing the water inside the areas of the ground floor of the palace is also part of this let's say, more general attitude that Scarpa has in considering architecture as something which should be exposed eventually in a very programmatic way to the changing conditions of the outside, the meteorology, the environment, and the conditions of light, the conditions of of the sun, the conditions of humidity, and all these things. So how does he deal with the idea in the very entrance of the palace, with this idea of governing this water entering in the periods of high levels of the Maria, of the Marea, yeah, of the level of the water, through these elevated passageways that we see in this photo, that allows to guarantee the continuity of the percurrents, of the possibility to get from one place to another and to use the spaces of the palace, also in a moment in which the water is actually invading the interior space at the lower level. So the idea is that from these big gates that are also filtering the natural light and inundating the interior space with natural light, the water can enter the ground floor of the palace and can play with this sort of sculptural element that is this staircase that allow eventually to reach the level of the water and to contemplate the process itself of the change of the level of the water. So really the focus of the project is the process of the natural process of the changing level of the water in the city of Venice, that you can contemplate through this sculptural object that is predisposed actually eventually exactly to be reacting to this change, to this phenomenon. It's a meteorological phenomenon that is exploited by Scarpa as a sort of artistic phenomenon. I don't know how to say. The meteorological phenomenon becomes a work of art together with this cultural architectural element of the staircase reacting to its transformations. And of course, according to the different levels of the water, the light penetrating from these gates, the natural light penetrating from these gates from the canal, bringing the life of the canal and the vitality, let's say the naturalness of that is the essence of Venice, to be immersed in nature because of its canals, brings it into the palace, creating always different games of light. I put different photos just to show you how the different conditions can create different effects. I think it's very interesting, this idea of working with the natural elements inside a building and creating a sort of interior landscape that is reacting with the environment outside. Here you see the places that are usually meant to be filled with water in the high level periods when there is no water, and so they still remain there in order to show the public crossing the palace the different states of possible states of this architecture that can be completely different according to the presence or the absence of water. And that is also, let's say, of course, protected by this fascia strip of concrete. Of course, the only part of the building which can be actually filled with water is the one that I showed you, but this hall that I showed you at the beginning in one photo connected to the garden is also meant to be, as I said, to be reacting to the light outside. And it's interesting the way that the choice of the materials in this sense, and the idea of merging artificial light with natural light and creating a sort of a dialogue, a strong relation between this sort of paraste of neon lights that interrupt the horizontal perspective of the room given by these ottone strips that are creating the rhythm, okay, the perspective toward the garden. Of course, the columns and some of the elements are already existing in the palace, but all the furbishment, the materials in this room are completely the product of of Scarpa's renovation. The walls, the ceiling is in stucco, and the walls and the pavement are in stone treated with different detailed treatment of its surface in order to react differently to the light. And also in the pavement there are these lines and strips of a different kind of stone. Actually, this is stone, and these are concrete slab, if I'm not wrong, and this is stone. Anyway, also the door of this room is a little door in which in the passages Scarpa is always focusing his great attention on details. For example, this little door connecting this room to the adjacent one is a tour de force of detail study. You see that it's made of the very same stone of the wall, and it is carved in the stone as it was a sort of a piece of stone that is momentarily detached from its surface. And this is true also for other points of passages, such as this one, in which you can see also the detail of the passage of the water. And we go to the garden. You can see here very well the situation of the garden with this very tall wall that is in a way also subtracting not only space but also light to the garden. So Scarpa actually focus on the aligning, let's say. So he creates a lawn, no, prato, a lawn, and he focus his design effort on these two strips that are actually following the development of the palace, and that are mediating between the interior space of the palace and the mall itself and the lawn itself. In these strips, he creates a sort of garden, a water garden, a real water garden. So again, water evoking the city outside. So the protagonist is always Venice. Venice with its character, with the presence of its canals and the strong character of its canals. This is a small canal that is following this path. You see here from the top view, this path, and then conveyed through some passages that are very much sculpturally crafted and carefully designed, passing through toward this small pool of water surrounded by a very rich pavement. So it is, of course, this famous Hortus Conclusus that Giuseppe Mazzariolo also praised for, and it was meant to be a contemplation space. For example, for the people going to the library, there is a library in the palace, in the foundation, or just taking a rest from the lively mood of the streets of the outside world of Venice outside this. It's a sort of portion of paradise. You remember when I read you the the quotation by Barragan, in which he said that the garden is a sort of piece of the universe, a sort of a metaphor of the universe. In this sense, Scarpa interprets this small garden as a metaphor of the paradise, as a sort of small piece of paradise in the mundane world. And you see here the archaeological use that Scarpa makes of ancient archaeological pieces, such as this Vera da Pozzo. I don't know exactly the English name of Vera da Pozzo. It's the part of how do you say pozzo? Oh my God. I look for it. Pozzo. I don't remember. I probably know it, but I don't remember. Water well. This is the element, the stone element, decorative element of a water well. And here we see, let me check. Here you see another archaeological element, ancient element, that is a lion, a sculpture of a lion belonging to some archaeological remains that is relocated by Scarpa together with the contemporary elements carved in stone into this garden, into this composition. It's an archaeological composition that is articulated in different levels. The lawn is on a higher level than the platform. The platform is detached from the lawn by a small wall, and this small wall is not only a wall, but is actually this zone, this border between these two worlds. And this border is an active border, something in which a lot of things happen, a lively border, enlivened by the water and by all these mechanisms and details that are presiding to the passage of the water through different stadiums until arriving to the final pool. For example, this gocciolatoio, no? This part that arrives here and then makes this tour, and the water is changing its consistence by passing through all these different elements and then arriving and quiet itself finally into this pool. Or this stone labyrinth designed by Scarpa himself. And then there is also the insertion of mosaics. For example, these mosaics of ceramics made by an artist called by Scarpa to intervene into this concrete wall. So all the details are studied in order to create this kind of lively border between these two conditions and to create the conditions for contemplation. And the contemplation, of course, goes together in a very oriental way. Of course, Scarpa is very aware of Japanese architecture and is looking a lot to Japanese architecture and gardens during his career. And of course, many of his works are kind of inspired by Oriental architecture and gardening. Through the water. Of course, the water is the element of this, is the main element of this contemplation, allowing this contemplation. Other photos, the mosaics, other mosaics here in the platform next to the water pool, in which the water at the end, that is the final stage of the water itself. All other archaeological elements that are placed in specific points in which there is a passage between the different levels, etc. So we go to another project. I don't know if you knew these projects, but it's interesting. Maybe if you knew them, maybe you didn't see so many details, or maybe we can discuss about them later. This is one of the last project that Carlo Scarpa was committed in. It lasted quite a long time. He considered the Tomba Brion, the Brion tombstone in San Vito di Altivole. It's a very small fraction near Asolo. That was the place in which Scarpa has been living for a long time of his life, in the Veneto countryside in the province of Treviso, in which Scarpa considered this one his masterpiece, the work that should have been considered his masterpiece. And so, therefore, he really works hard and never stops projecting, never stopped designing this work. There are myriads of drawings. Scarpa had this very si potrebbe dire, very attitude in never putting a point, never putting an end to his projects, and that was very hard to deal with by his clients, but also by him. He was never satisfied with the final stage of his project, and he wasn't quite able to establish an end to the design process that eventually could be going on forever. And the San Vito di Altivole project is a great example in this sense, because Scarpa never stopped. Also after its completion, the completion of the main pieces, he continued to work on it and to produce drawings and variations to the project. Anyway, we are at the end of the 60s and between the end of the 60s and the end of the 70s. So as you see, a very long process. And the program is actually a tombstone for a couple of very important men that are Brion and his wife, Honorina. That they are the parents of Ennio Brion, who is also a great client for many architects and designers like Zanuso or others, Brion Vega, maybe you have heard about it. Anyway, a family of rich entrepreneurs and the important family, and the wife Honorina, the wife of Brion, is the one who asked Scarpa to design the tombstone for her husband, in which she would have also been buried when she would die. So we are in a situation in which we see it from the plan. This is an existing cemetery of San Vito di Altivole, and there is a very big area if we consider that it is conceived for only one burial, only one tombstone, and so Scarpa in a way creates a whole program of a ritual path around the core of the composition, that is the tombstone of the Brions. This is the tombstone, that is this one that we see in the photo. Okay, so it's an arch. Of course, this project could be considered a great metaphor of Venice, because we find evocations and re-evocations, reminds to Venice everywhere if we look for them. For example, in the shape of this tombstone that evokes the shape of a bridge that is inside its surface, its intradosso. The surface is rivestita, come si dice, is finished with the green mosaic that reacts with the water, as it was one of Venetian canals, the play that the water creates on the introducts of the bridges in the Venetian canals. So of course it is a sort of ode, a sort of homage to Venice. Okay, every single piece of this composition, of this very articulated composition, a kind of tour de force, projectual design tour de force, is a reference to Venice. So we are back to the plan. This is the core of the composition, that is the tombstone. And here we have two rectangular spaces, areas. Here we have two pool of waters in which these two sort of arms are finishing, are terminated. Let's say at the end of these two arms there is always a pool of water, but in this case this pool of water hosts a small pavilion, a sort of pavilion of contemplation that is evoking a lot some oriental pavilions and kiosks over the lakes, for example, in China and Japan. And in this case, the so-called this is the pavilion, the kiosk, and this is the chapel, the funerary chapel. That is the real architecture architectural building that is part of this composition. And of course, all these three elements that are the main elements are linked through one to each other through a series of very complex paths that are the very aim of the composition, and that are accompanying the visitor into this ritual path between life and death, death and life, between these two conditions of life, between life and death. Of course, there is always this idea of accompanying the two wife and husband, but also the visitor in this world that is actually suspended between life and death. But also there is the idea of the hortus conclusus again, because we have a situation, we can see it from the plan, in which this is sort of wall enclosing walls. We enter the tombstone from the existing cemetery, actually from here. We cross a part of the existing cemetery, then, here. Here we have the very entrance that is mediated through this element. Sorry, where do I found the element? This element of the two circles, that is a typical Venetian, but also Oriental element. Of course, Venice is full of Oriental elements. Maybe I'll find here, you see it here. I'm sorry, because they are not in order. Maybe these two circles, one next to the other, creating an almond in the middle that has symbolical contents. And so you enter from this, you see these two circles that you can't cross, so you are forced to go on the right or on the left. If you go on the right, you find yourself immersed in this pavilion overlooking this pool of water, from which you can in a way contemplate the whole garden with the tombstone, although you don't see the part of the chapel. Or you go to the left, and if you go to the left, you are following this canal of water that is bringing you to the tombstone. Or maybe you follow this path on the otherwise, and you are brought toward this very Wrightian architectural composition that is the chapel, with this its pool of water at the end. Of course, there is a strong influence by Frank Lloyd Wright in Scarpa. Scarpa is one of the most Wrightian Italian architects ever, and you can see it from the geometries of the plan. You can see it from the details, from these Oriental details. You can see it from the corner, from this angle of 45 degrees in the bunker. That it's something that we find in many plans of Wright houses, and not only in the houses. In the use of the diagonal, the diagonal is a typical device of Wright's way to conceive space and organize spaces, not only in the interior, but also exactly in the open spaces, in the gardens, etc. So let's go to walk through this path, also because I don't want to arrive last minute without having the possibility to ask questions, and I want to leave some time for the debate if we have something. So I show you. Okay, we more or less we understood the way it is organized. So here we are in the tombstone. Let's say we are looking from the tombstone toward one of these arms, the one in which the canal is running through this mall and connecting the pool of water with the pavilion to the tombstone itself. And this is the entrance. This is the architectural device of the entrance with this the two round circles that are showing what is beyond, but not allowing to cross this wall. But you only have to turn yourself into this labyrinthic system of paths. This is the pavilion. This is the pavilion and the pool of water on which the pavilion is insisting, and that is this sort of contemplation device. Of course, you can see both right and orient in the way in which the concrete surface is treated and it's articulated. There is also a very strong feeling of how the materials of architecture react to natural elements that are water or vegetation, such as the water lilies in the pool of water that have also this cultural element in the middle. So reacting with these different articulations of the pavement, and the mosaic again, as in the Querini Stampaglia, and also the way in which vegetation invades actually the pavilion and the wall. For example, here behind this in the perimeter wall, the vegetation that is which is spreading over the walls, and that is something that Scarpa of course had foreseen in his project, and he wanted to happen. He encouraged, in a way. He knew that this concrete wall, rough concrete wall, would have been colonized by musgi, by different kinds of vegetation, as you see here, for example, in the process of the passing of time and the exposure of architecture to the atmospheric elements. So, of course, this was completely part of the conception of the project since the very beginning. And of course, here we can see all the very careful study of each detail in the articulation between the water pool and the platform and the walls. And also we can see here a little bit, maybe then there is another photo, but also we saw Ghirri's photographs in another lecture that you may go to retake for understanding better the project. That you have in the other slides about the landscape and photography lecture. Here we see the relationship with a little bit the relationship with the landscape around. There have been many scholars arguing and studying this relationship, because it is an enclosure, an enclosed garden, this hortus conclusus, that should be isolated from the context, but at the same time Scarpa found many ways to in a way find a relation with the context. For example, through the view that was allowed, for example, from the pavilion in this case towards the tombstone, of some of the emerging elements of the landscape around. For example, the tower of the campanile of this church, or the Rocca di Asolo. I think it's this one, but I'm not sure. Anyway, there are elements in the landscape that are visible over the perimeter wall, and the perimeter wall would have been also a little bit higher if the clients didn't ask Scarpa to make it a little bit lower. So Scarpa had studied a lot the relationship that he wants to achieve between the horizon of the wall. Remember Le Corbusier in the second lecture we did, the horizon of the wall, and what should be visible from this horizontal line. And also, this wall is not completely full horizontal wall. First of all, it is an architectural device in itself, because it is inclined, because it has a width. It's not only a wall. It has an articulation, as a sort of bastion perimetering and defending the cemetery, the tombstone, but at the same time it has vertical. Have I got a photo? No, vertical cuts from which it is possible to capture and to frame specific views of the landscape around that are very much studied, of course, by Scarpa. They are not complete, they are not at all random, they are not at all casual, they are actually studied in the precise way from which the visitor inside would have been able to look through these vertical cuts in the perimetral wall. So here you see how the light and the vegetation are playing in the walls, and Scarpa adds some interesting mechanisms that are still playing much more with like this sort of meridiana, no? That is playing with the light and with the hours, the light in the different hours of the day. This has been also at the center of the experimentation of different photographers. Guido Guidi did a very great job on the walls of the Tomba Brion. And the vegetation, as I said you before, the vegetation and also the process of erosion of the wall itself, the process of colonization of the wall itself by natural elements. Here we are in the other arm, okay, of the composition, in which of this L, in which we have the funerary chapel that is facing this second pool of water that is closing the composition on the very other, so the opposite side of the one of the pavilion. And here we have a place, an area dedicated to the burial of priests, and populated by cipressi, no, cypress, as in the tradition of cemeteries, the typical tree essence of cemeteries that are symbolizing the death, resurrection, etc., going towards the vertical dimension, the connection to the spiritual sphere of life and death. Okay, so this chapel, I'm not going too deep into the architecture of the chapel. That would be another theme of discussion. Of course, it is very filled with Wrightian and Oriental references, and it's got also this very close bunker-like appearance made of, in which this rough appearance of the exposed concrete is valorized at its most, and in the interior there is a very strong presence, very articulated presence of details, and also pieces of furniture, religious furniture, that are designed by Scarpa himself. Here you see again, also from this other point of observation, the way in which the emerging elements of the skyline are eventually treated, are eventually entering the precinct through the relationship between them and this horizontal wall. Again, like on the other side, we have a sort of sink landscape on which Scarpa, that makes you understand a lot of things, because Scarpa spends a long time drawing details of the architectural elements that would have been synced, would have been deep in the water, so visible only through the water. Look at this. And there is a wall of these elements, or the reflection of the architecture itself on the water. So there is this superposition between a sink world that is very carefully studied and designed out and carved in the concrete, although it shouldn't be completely visible unless from the surface of the water, and the reflection of the architecture on the water itself. There is this merging of worlds that, of course, evoke the merging between the world of the death and the world of life, of the people alive. And also, again, a metaphor of Venice, of something that one day could be completely synced in the water, or destroyed, or made invisible by the water.
a sort of destiny, okay, of Venice. So finally, I want to close our Scarpa trip with this very poetic example on which I'm not going to stay too much, that is the monument to the Partisan in Venice. We are in front of the gardens of the Biennale. If you went to the Biennale, I'm sure that you saw this monument. It's exactly in front of the entrance of the Giardini. And it's interesting because this monument used to exist and was destroyed. So this sculptor, Augusto Murer, was charged to create, to project, to design with the competition, to design a new monument. And this monument was this one, the design winner. The winner of the competition was this statue by Augusto Murer, that is this one. This, I think it's bronze statue of a abandoned woman that is the partisan, the woman. It's a symbol to all the women that took active part in the resistance, and that is symbolized by this single monument. That is the statue. And so after the statue won the competition, Carlo Scarpa was charged to create a basement for the statue, because this was a sculpture. So Murer was not so clear about how the statue would be dealing with the being lying and not standing. And Scarpa thought that the right way to experience the statue, the monument, was to have it on a lower level than the level of the city itself. So he designed this pedestal. We can call it a pedestal, maybe, this platform made of different levels of concrete elements that, of course, are resembling these structures of the harbors, no? The frangiflutti are called in Italian. I guess that you understood what I mean. But I don't know the English name of these elements, but these are these big stone, the big concrete square cubes elements that are meant to stop the power of the water near the harbors. Anyway, of course, there is this evocation, and on the other side, there is, again, like in the Querini Stampaglia, this line between the lawn and the platform in front of the room. It is again a border, a boundary, a boundary that is not a line, but it's an area in which the boundary is living as a boundary itself. So it is making explicit the limits between two worlds that are, in this case, the city and the lagoon. In this case, this border between the city and the lagoon is made of a fragmentation, a border in which the city fragments itself toward the lagoon, and it is always much more merging and digging into the water. And the interesting thing is that the statue is located on the very lower level of this platform, in a way that it is possibly digged in the water when the water is high, together with the other elements of its pedestal. So both the statue and both the pedestal are exposed again to the forces of nature, the forces of nature which acts as in the walls, as the vegetation and the humidity and the air on the walls of the Tomba Brion. Here, these concrete elements are eroded by water, are exposed to a process of degradation, progressive degradation, that is grow stronger as much as you move toward the water. And they are covered with the algae and with the products of the passage of the water. You see they are blackened, they are completely covered with muffe, with this algae, the these green organisms that cover the statue itself. And so they are making explicit this idea both of the border that is not a line but is an area between two worlds, so a sort of mediation between these two worlds, a boundary between these two worlds that in which everything happens actually, but also the idea of how much architecture should be, in order to be alive, should be exposed to natural materials, to the erosion of meteorological elements. You see, these images are very powerful. In my opinion, of course, they also create the illusion of the partisan to be lying on the water in certain moments, to emerge from the water as a nymph, as a goddess. And finally, to close, I show you, guys, would you like to make another stop of 5 minutes? Or would you like to go on? It's not very long, this part, but if you like to have 5 minutes, maybe we can do. Why not? Are you still there? 5 minutes can be nice. I also think so. Yeah. So see you at 1:15, and I show you this last project, but it's really the shortest part. And we go to our next project that is a more recent project. Actually, it is contemporary to the beginning of the Breon tombstone, so it's not so much more recent than others. Of course, more recent than Barragan's intervention. That is the Piscinas das Marés in Porto, in Lessa da Palmeira. We are on a neighborhood in the outskirts of the city of Porto, in the area of Matosinhos, more or less, for who knows Porto. And it is one of the first projects by a young Álvaro Siza, studying in what would become the FAUP under the teaching of Fernando Távora. We are in the beginning of the 60s, in a period in which Portugal is, as I said, very much involved in political battles, struggles, and also in this attempt to renovate the architectural culture of the country, a country that is at the margin of the European debate. It's not so much integrated in the European debate, and its isolation is increased by the fact that there still is, as in Spain, a dictatorship in Portugal, the Salazar's Estado Novo, until the mid-70s. So it is a very rich, actually, condition, marginal but rich, actually, maybe also until some extent for its very marginality, in which very many premises for what would become the Portuguese architecture, contemporary Portuguese architecture all over the world, are developed. So Siza has been working together with Távora to another project of another pool in a neighborhood area of the Piscinas, the Lessa de Marés. And it is, if I'm not wrong, is a very fast project, as an individual architect that he works on individually. There are two works by Sisa, one next to the other. One is the Piscinas, and the other one is the Casa do Chá, that maybe you also know. Anyway, we are focusing on this work because it's very interesting in order to find again this parsimony of gestures in the attitude toward nature and the landscape, the morphological conditions, the topographical, geographical conditions of the project, because this is a very special program that allows us to make this discourse, because this is actually not exactly a building, but it is a sort of cross encounter between a building and the landscape, because Sisa is called to create these swimming pools, a sort of structure for the swimming pool. So there is a sort of building, if we may call it so, with spogliatoi, with the service areas for the swimming pools, a cafe, bathrooms, etc. And the rest of the project is actually all in the open air, and creating these basins of the two swimming pools, one for adults and the other one for children, in this granite rocky formation facing the Atlantic Ocean at the very outskirts of the after the fosse of the River Douro. After the point in which the River Douro crossing the city of Porto is dividing the city of Porto to the city of Villanova de Gaia is emerging into the ocean. So we are in a situation that Giovanni Chiaramonte in this photograph describes in a very strong way. We are in this again border condition between coast and the ocean, and that also expresses very much the Portuguese culture, no? This tendency toward an otherness, the fact of being the frontier, western frontier of Europe, the fact of being the last fragment of Europe before the ocean that separates Europe from the Americas. So there is this tendency toward an otherness, and this project is making the most out of this incredible location in this very border between this rocky coastline in Leste da Palmeira and the Atlantic Ocean in front of it, evoking other worlds to come. So this, in a way, when we published this project in Lotus International a few years ago, actually, it was one of the first issues on which I was working on. Of course, the project was already very famous, and Sisa was already one of the star architects around. But we retook this project into the debate. We devoted our interest again into this project of the 60s, because we were intention to find in this project a sort of a seeds of this disciplinary intrusion of architecture into landscape that would have been very crucial in the following decades, and that we discussed a lot during the course. We talked about landscape urbanism, for example. We talked a lot about the disciplinary encroaching between landscape, urbanism, architecture. And this project, I want to argue, together with the other ones I showed you, is one of the seeds of this disciplinary encroachment and of this disciplinary extra overcoming of the boundaries. The topography of the site, wedged between the coastal road to the north of Porto and the cliff facing onto the Atlantic, is carved up in the manner of Wright, Frank Lloyd Wright, by horizontal concrete dividing walls that, delimiting the paths and the basins of the pools, shape a new landscape. So Caesar, acting with very with the superposing a geometry to the nature in a way similarly to what Barragan had done in the Pedregal, creates from scratch a new landscape from the existing one. He characterizes this rocky landscape that is more or less the same in the whole coastline development in a very special way through the making emerge a geometry out of the rocks. So this is the strength of this project that, in my opinion, and it's an opinion that is also shared by many other architects and commentators of the piscinas, show a resemblance with the instruments of earthworks, land art, that is developing, if you remember well, in the very same period in the United States of America. So we saw how people such as Robert Smithson, Richard Long in England, but in the United States, many people, Michael Heiser, Nancy Holt, or Richard Morris, Walter de Maria, etc. They are working on with works of art in the landscape on site, in the desert, for example, in the American desert, using the instrument of landscaping, for example, carving, creating structures, huge scale structures into the landscape, or subtracting and adding material, or moving, removing, and just displacing material, etc., in a way that is comparable to they use these instruments that were usually instruments considered to be the instruments typical of landscapers, no? The thing of landscapers that shouldn't be of artists or architects. So Caesar acts as a landscaper or as an earth artist in this granite, stony, rocky coastline, introducing this germ of geometry into the gaps between the rocks. That is very, very interesting because, again, like Barragan, it valorizes at best the morphology of the rocks and of the landscape, of the morphology, of the topography, but not mimicking with this element, with the artificial elements, these landscapes, but with the language that is much in contrast with the regularity of the shapes of the rocks. On the opposite, this language that he uses is a very controlled geometrical language that owes a lot from avant-garde, from the Still, from Wrightian lesson, from all the, let's say, new, let's say, from the conquest of modernity that were already there, and that Portugal was dealing with since a few decades. Anyway, so here we see one of the first versions of the master plan. It is not exactly the last one, so we will see how it will become. This is the first version, but we see already the main structure of the site. So we have here the the street, no, the Stadel street, and here we have the rocks and the water. Okay. Sorry. Okay. And here we have a strip in which there are actually if we may call it so, the building with the services, and here a path. It's similar to Tomba Brion if we consider the articulation of the path, because you don't enter in this way. You don't enter the site perpendicularly to the street. You just go through and accompany this edge between the city and nature, the street and the rocks. You go through this boundary, you go through this edge, you inhabit this edge in a labyrinthic path carved between horizontal walls of blackened concrete, exposed concrete naturally, and then you arrive to a point in which the landscape discloses suddenly in front of your eyes, in the last version of the project, mediated by a wall that creates a 45-degree angle with the line parallel to the coast. So, of course, this stems from Taliesin. I guess that you have in mind the plan of Taliesin West by Frank Lloyd Wright, or if you don't have it, you can go to Google and find it, the master plan of Taliesin West. There is this diagonal. I said before in the Tomba Brion that the diagonal was the typical device used by Frank Lloyd Wright in his architecture, and also in the master plan of Taliesin West is like that. So of course this is a direct quotation with no doubts of Taliesin West. In these years, Portuguese architects are looking a lot to Frank Lloyd Wright, to Alvar Aalto, to organic architecture, also to Brazilian architecture actually. Anyway, this 45-degree angled wall, exposed concrete wall, is pointing toward landscape, toward the horizon, the infinite horizon of the Atlantic Ocean, in which the vision, the experiential, perceptive experience of the visitor who did this sort of ritual path and through these two enclosed walls in which you didn't see yet, you haven't yet seen the landscape open suddenly to your eyes, mediate and intersect the basin, the main basin of the pool. Of course, the main basin of the pool have water inside, and water that is a little bit different than the water of the ocean, because it is a calm water, a still water. And so you have these two conditions of water that are again creating this mediation. It's conceptual art if you really think about it. It's like really like a reinterpretation of what Spiral Jetty could have been for Robert Smithson. So here you see a little bit more a photo from the top. You see here the street running through the coastline. You see here the building. You see here the path with this cover, this one side pitched roof, and this horizontal, almost archaeological walls of concrete, and this 45-degree angle that points toward the main basin. And here there is the other basin of the children, devoted to the children, and that have a very different, more organic shape than the bigger one. Anyway, the way in which the two basins, the two pools, are carved into the topography itself is very much the same, using the same approach that Barragan used to create these plazas that were filling the voids within the rocks themselves. So in a way, it is like these rocks already contains the possibility of this shape, of this geometry. And what the architect would be able to do is to read these suggestions, to read these indications, and to understand which is the minimal gesture able to join, fill the voids in this eventual imaginative geometry of nature, and to create your basin, the basin for separating this still water condition to the moved and cold water of the ocean. And the same is for the small one. You see here the rocks, the basin really follows the rocks in a way that the status of these basins, of the swimming pools, is exactly in the middle between the world of an artificial swimming pool and the world of the sea, of the ocean. They are in the middle between nature and artifice. They are really suspended between these two conditions, like in the boundary, exactly like the monument to the partisan is at the boundary between these two worlds, the city, the mineral thing, and the water element, the lagoon. Here you see from the top, you see that the building is almost not visible from the top. You just need to enter and to be immersed into this ritual path that at the beginning is almost dark and doesn't allow you to see the landscape that opens yourself into on the left, like in the Tomba Brion, you weren't allowed to cross the two circles, but you needed to accompany to move toward in parallel to the entrance, so to go to the right or to go to the left. Here you have a one-sided percourse, a one-sided path in which you are moving toward this labyrinthic space made of black and reinforced concrete surfaces, with sometimes with the ceiling, sometimes with no ceiling, and suddenly you get to the final point in which you have this focus onto the horizon. And the slabs of concrete are, you see, filling, exactly as in the Pedregal, filling the voids between the stones, and the stone seems to be emerging from these slabs of concrete, creating these very polished lines and geometrical lines, contrasting very much and completing the work of nature. These are the sketches that many sketches that Caesar produced during the work of the design process of the piscines, of the swimming pools. Of course, there are plenty of these drawings that shows the almost maniacal like care in trying to detect all the differences in the topography, in the orography. There is a very deep study of the orography, as much as a landscape, as a landscaper or a gardener would have done, in order to insert your gestures, your architectural gestures into this situation. So what is placed at the center is the temporal and sensorial experience produced by a series of interlinked spatial events in which long corridors in semi-darkness alternate with sudden openings, panoramic terraces, niches, and small changes in height, altogether constructing a dense mesh of perceptual occurrences. Reacting with the precision of a topographer to the uneven route through the granite rocks, Caesar carved the two pools out of the contours of the terrain, seeing in it the predisposition to accommodate a geometry, and assigning to these bodies of water, suspended in a state of calm, an ambiguous state halfway between the artificial and the natural. So, summarizing what we have said until now. This is very important, that this predisposition to accommodate a geometry. So nature always have, according to Caesar, predisposition to accommodate a geometry. So you need to be able to read this predisposition and to study the right gesture, the right line, the right geometry, which would eventually make this predisposition emerge. So these are photos of the swimming pools that are populated with the public. So these very interesting status between a sort of isolated and protected water, space, and the immensity and the violence also sometimes of the ocean. So Alvaro Siza also, he himself said very clearly, my design set out to make the most out of the natural conditions that here, as it were, had already started to shape the pool, utilizing the rocks and completing the hollows in them with no more than the strictly necessary walling. So he says that the nature already had begun his work. So architect would only need to complete the work of nature, not to impose another thing on it. Okay, that's it. Just show you other photos. Did you see this? The way in which the continuity of the path is guaranteed by these very small elements, and the concrete of these connections is not continuing when it doesn't when it is not necessary, because you can leave it natural with the sand and the rocks. They only exist, stairs and platforms and small bridges, only when they are needed in order to assure the fruition, the comfortable fruition of this incredibly beautiful natural space. Okay, so that was the last thing, and I just want to show you, which is the bibliography that I suggest. Don't be scared because it's very few, because you already have this one on Barragan, because already assigned for previous lectures. I think you remember, because I assigned it for 2 lectures, the one in which we talked about Burle Marx and the one in which we also mentioned Noguchi. So it is always the same piece, the same article. So don't be scared. And I have to say, for Italian people, if you want to read it in Italian, ask me, because in Lotus Navigator there is the Italian translation, if you prefer to read it in Italian instead than in the original version. Then on Siza, it's a piece of mine, a very small article I wrote in Lotus when we republished the project that I was mentioning before. It's 1-page article. 1 page is in Italian, 1 page is in English, so very short. And on Scarpa, I just suggest to read this very short article by Peter Buchanan. It was republished in September 2016 on the Architectural Review. It was an old piece of 1985 article, always article. We're not talking about chapters, essays, or books. On the Brion Cemetery, the Brion tombstone. So about the other projects, you can find it on Google, or you can use the slides or whatever, but these are the only mandatory things. On Scarpa, there are other 2 things that maybe if you like, I can put on WePip. Of course, are not mandatory, but they are talking a little bit, going a little bit farther into this idea of the relationship of the body and the architecture in the Brion Cemetery, and with the and this careful study by Scarpa of the relationship with the landscape around, with the horizon, with the height of the wall in relation to the horizon, with these vertical cuts in the wall, etc. So of course these are not mandatory, but I already saw in the post that one of you, that is Letizia, asked me about Scarpa, and so now I will reply to you, Letizia, but I think that this would be interesting to begin with if you want to go deeper into Scarpa's architecture for the exam. Okay, that's it. So it's up to you now if you want to ask things. We have half an hour if you like, or we can. Okay, or it's up to you if you want to go on a little bit with the questions and comments, or if you want to go to have lunch and you are tired. So I give you some minutes to make your reflections, and of course maybe you may need some time to articulate questions or comments. Thank you, Ishita. I am happy that you were interested in the topic, and I'm very happy that you
were here until now. Okay, Omar, interestingly, even without an educational background specialized in landscape or architecture, they made tremendous, resilient, and valuable work that neither most architects nor the landscapers nowadays, whose reliance are on software and technology, can do or even imitate. One of the points also that all of them did not rely on the topics and practical aspects of the profession of architecture, urban or landscape. Instead, they have had a strong knowledge of other aspects that were one of the main drivers towards solving the existing problems that could not have solved with the architectural knowledge only. Yeah, actually, yeah, Omar, I agree. I find that it's very, very interesting to see how these are also architectural instruments, you know, but it's a specific approach that all architects should have in some measure. But of course, some architects have in major measures than others to solve existing problem, as you said. Practical aspects, or no practical aspects, you said it in negative terms, but you say a thing that I find very interesting, that is towards solving the existing problems. I think it's one of the focuses of today's lecture. The fact that this approach to architecture and to landscape, because as I said, they are not distinguishable, and I don't think it's even useful to distinguish between architecture and landscape in this case, is to face existing problems with strategies that are not trying to consider natural elements and problems and aspects of the program as menaces, as threats to the purity of architecture, but eventually as opportunities for the project itself. Yeah, especially Barragan, but yeah, I think the of course Scarpa is more come si dice, is more focused on creating his own world of metaphor, invention, and reaction to nature, to his ideas of nature, etc. And is very focused on architecture and on this very complex articulation. So it is less about solving an existing problem. So what you define as resilience, now that I understand in which sense you say resilient work in such cases. But Barragan and Siza are both very interesting for the way in which they are using the elements as opportunity, are using. But also Scarpa in Querini Stampaglia actually is a lecture, is a lesson in this sense. The way in which rocks and water, in different ways, one from each other, but with the same presence in the project, can be used as opportunities instead than as threats to be avoided or to be solved in a practical, functional way. They are elements of the project. The project is actually dialoguing with them, creating new landscapes. And the fact that they are all able to create new landscapes from scratch is interesting, because in a way they are creating places. The landscape in itself is very beautiful and very interesting. The coastline in Porto is incredible, etc. But their interventions are making emerge some aspects of these natural elements that we weren't able to see before architecture came. Know what I mean? Say, they work together with nature. So Alejandro says, thank you so much. Last project was just amazing for me, since we are dealing in studio with the seafront. Nice. So I also can tell you, Alejandro, that there is an issue of Lotus that if you, maybe you can find it in the library, or if you want, you can ask to me by email, I can send you something.
if you're dealing with the coast front, because there was an issue that we dedicated to, I can show you, we dedicated to border. Now, some of the discourses that we did today, like the Monument to the Partisan or the Sisa swimming pools, that are dealing with this world that is in the middle between the city and the water, or the, let's say, emerging world and the water, or mineral world and aquatic world, and everything it means, no, this passage, what this passage entails. That are many things at different levels. Yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, so I can send it to you. It's the number. Let me show you. Stop sharing, and I share my screen, and I show you. It's this one, 168, 2019. It's called Borders. And we dealt not only with the philosophical implication of the border, but also, of course, with the architectural implications of the border in different conditions. And one of these conditions was exactly the waterfront. So we collected some projects dealing with the idea of the waterfront and how it was dealt in different situations. So you didn't know the swimming pool project by Sisa?
No, in my case, for example, I didn't knew it before.
Okay. Oh, wow. I thought it was a very, and maybe I can add just before closing that this project is now being restored by a team of the FAUP that won a financial help by the Getty Foundation. That was the last edition of come si dice, of a prize that the Getty Foundation usually have been given for a lot of years to for the restoration of modernist buildings. And Sisa swimming pools have been the winner of the last edition, one of the winner of the last edition. And there is this very interesting project that is led by a group of the FAUP together with Sisa. So Sisa is intervening on his own building at the distance of several decades, because it's 60s. It means that we are 60 years has passed. And he said very interesting stuff about what it means to intervene on your own work when you are a different person. I don't know if you have familiarity with Portuguese culture, but Sisa has always been also Sisa and many Portuguese architects are been reader and admirer of Fernando Pessoa. And Fernando Pessoa in literature, in poetry, has got this idea of having different personalities. And Sisa was joking on this idea of being a different person who is acting on the project of another him, of another himself, another self. Let's say he as a young architect, and he as an old architect, retaking the project of his as a young architect that was another architect. So it was really funny, and it's a very interesting project. It's a sort of ampliamento, widening. There is a new part of the program that is being added to the swimming pool, and then the restoration of the existing building and walls and platforms and all the structures existing since the 60s. So Enkeleida says the oriental elements at Scarpa's project that we saw, for instance, at Tomba Brion, the two circles merging, are also present at this regeneration project of Castelvecchio, of course, Castle in Verona. And also the pattern of lines at the Water Garden at Tomba Brion are present on the front facade of Banca Popolare of Verona as well. Of course, Enkeleida, you're completely right. Scarpa is actually often working on the same elements, on recurring elements that are topoi in his modus operandi, in his project design baggage and repertoire. And but I chose for today the projects that, according to me, were conveying at a higher degree this idea of working together with the natural elements, the atmospheric elements. The Fondazione Querini, because of the water of the canal entering the building, and Tomba Brion for this way of making the landscape entering and of exposing architecture to environment. And also, of course, the monument to the partisan is obvious, the reason why I chose it for this lecture. So for the exam, do we have to memorize the names of all projects that have been done for each figure, studying its approach and say how it translated in his work? I mean, for all lectures, not this one only. Okay, yes. So Omar, I don't think you have to memorize all the projects. Of course, it depends on which projects we are talking about. Let's say, for this lecture, we dealt with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 projects, and we dedicated mostly 4 hours to 4 projects. So I guess that I would like you to memorize the names of these 4 projects, because we dedicated a lot of space to these projects. The same maybe could be said for some of the main projects by Burle Marx. Maybe you can choose some of the main ones. You have the essay by Melanie Simo and Peter Walker. You can focus on the one mentioned by them, by the bibliography. So you have the bibliography to make it, and you have the lectures to make it. Of course, I'm not pretending that you memorize all the projects and the authors of the lectures in which we went through a collection of many projects, like, I don't know, the one on landscape urbanism, the one on traces on the ground. We mentioned really many things. So you should have a certain sense of opportunity, let's say, in understanding which projects are worthy to be memorized and which are not necessary to memorize. If you want to be strict and memorize everything, you can, but of course you're not asked to do it. But you have the bibliography that guides in this. You have the slides and you have the bibliography. So of course the lectures are one thing, and then there is the bibliography. So you go through, for example, there is a single article mentioned many times today, a single article talking about Burle Marx, Noguchi, and Barragan. Okay, it's obvious that this article is very important. Or there is a single article on the Tomba Brion. It's obvious that the Tomba Brion is necessary to, you should know about the Tomba Brion because you had an article dedicated to this, and you had the Ghirris photos dedicated to this. So you meet it crossing several lectures. So it is important. So it should be memorized. I don't know if it's clear. It's a good sense thing. Then Ishita, I have a question about the exam. Nice. Will it be possible to give the second call online if the first call is close to the studio exam for some of us? What do you mean by the first call is close to the studio exam, Ishita?
Yes, I mean that for some people, the studio exam is right either the next day of our exam for the elective or 2 days before.
So you of course, the problem is that you don't like to superpose the exam to the other exam because it would be too much.
Yes.
Yeah, clear. Okay, so of course it's possible to make the exam online. It's necessary for you to ask me formally. I mean, you have to send me an email and explaining the reason why you won't be able to make the exam in presence. And we all received, I guess, I don't know if you also received, but I received an email by the presidency that said that in specific conditions and cases, the students were allowed to make the exam online after the approval by the professor. So you just need to send me an email and say, okay, I want to make the second session, but I can't be there in presence because of this, this, and this. I will send you an email in which I will say, okay, no problem. So then I'll have the list of people that will be attending the exam in online, and so that's okay. The only thing that I would ask you is, guys, okay, we can talk about it also next time, but I would like not to come in Piacenza in the case in which nobody is coming in presence. But if I have only the emails of the people that are not coming in presence, I don't know if the other ones are actually coming, or if maybe someone inscribed to the session and is not willing to really attend the exam, to actually attend the exam. So since you're not many, can you send me an email and tell me I will be attending the exam and I will be attending in presence or online, and so I will know who is attending online, who is attending in presence, and who is not attending, like the day before. It would be nice for you to do it because it would be an help for me. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good idea, I'd say. So maybe because once once happened that I went to Piacenza for the exams and nobody was there. Everybody was online, like in other places of the world. So I was there alone, and I felt very stupid. So just not to be happening to make it happen again. Just tell me if you're willing to come in presence or if you're willing to come online, and then we can do it. Everything is possible. So, guys, think a lot to the questions that you need to ask me before the exam. And next time, for who is in Piacenza, please come in presence. For who is not in Piacenza, like Omar, maybe I know you're not in Italy either. So don't worry, you come online, but come. So everybody have the possibility to hear attend the end of the course. That will be a sort of maybe we can make a sort of conclusion. We can try to make a sort of conclusion. Would you be able to share this link of Lotus issue? Yeah. So actually I wouldn't be allowed to spread Lotus issue to everybody. So just not to make it circulate too much out of the very strict personal use of each one. I would ask you who is interested in the waterfront issue. Write me and I'll share the link. But I can't. I wouldn't be allowed to share it, like, because it's something that you can purchase from the website. You can purchase on paper, you can purchase it on PDF. So I don't like to give it as a material. But for who is actually very interested, I can make an exception. So let's make like that, or else I feel too much guilty. Okay, that's it. Have you got other questions? No. Okay, so I will share the materials of today on Weebip, the recording, the slides, and the bibliography. Remember that the only mandatory bibliography is the one that you find on the slide of the mandatory one. The rest is not. And see you to the web page link. Ah, of course. No, the web page link is here. Done. About next time, no, you're welcome. About next time, see you at 10:15 in Piacenza, in the same classroom at the same hour for our last meeting. So thank you so much, guys, and have a good lunch and have a good day. Bye. I interrupt the recording.